Hello friends, and this is Surat. Welcome to the series of CS Siteminder. This is the continuation of the session of previous. In the first session, we have learned about what is CS Siteminder, why we need CS Siteminder, and what is the benefit of using Siteminder in the industry. So, in this session of Siteminder, we will see some more detail about Siteminder thing, and we need to understand, and we will understand what is Siteminder architecture, how this is deployed, what is the core component of Siteminder, and how Siteminder interact between each other, each component of itself, and provide security to our application. So in this course, in this session of today, we will go through all these topics like Siteminder core component, its architecture, and how it will protect a web resource, what is authentication, authorization, and some more topics like SSO, large scale deployment, identity federation, and its agent processes like secure proxy server and any other agent Siteminder will use. So this is the course content for this session, and if time uh, permit us, and if we go through in a deeper section, I will explain what is directory server and how directory server can be integrated with CS Siteminder. But the directory server installation and configuration is not in the scope of um, Siteminder, but I will show you how this directory server is look like, and how it can be integrated with Siteminder, and how the directory server data will come to Siteminder for user authentication and for user management, and providing the user to a specific means how to protect a user to access a particular data. That part we can see in Siteminder configuration with LDAP server. So in this session we will go through all these topics. So welcome to the session, and the first overview of this is, as I explained, we will go through the Siteminder architecture and Siteminder core component, and integrate it with web agents and different agent types of Siteminder. So let's start the session of today. This is Siteminder architecture. So basically, if I say an architecture, so it what does it mean? So in it's a product view. If I say in terms of a product, so architecture exactly define how the whole product is developed. Product developed in the sense, what is the backend server, what is the front end server, and how the business logic will flow in the total architecture, means total product, from starting from front end to the back end. So here Siteminder is designed as an entire architecture. So what does entire architecture mean? Entire architecture mean that each logic, each specific section of the product is divided into a different layer. Suppose I am accessing Siteminder. So as I am a user, I am accessing from my browser. So I will fall into a category called as client layer. In client layer, whatever the client will access to my server, that will come as a part of client layer. Then second layer of this architecture will come as a presentation logic layer. So what presentation logic layer will contain? Presentation logic layer will contain the web servers, your JSP files, HTML files, the servlets, so which exactly prepare your content and show the user to a differently GUI method, GUI representation, that will come under the presentation logic layer. If I say this thing, and then if yeah if I say this thing, so what happens, uh, this is the GUI mode. So I am a end user, so what I does, I just click on my web browser. when I hit my web browser from my client, means the internet client, it will access page in the sense this is the static HTML page, as I shown you from starting, as I shown in the starting, or I will show in the next later sessions what exactly this page and from where this page is loading. So when you install the Siteminder, you will get a folder structure where you are install your Siteminder admin UI. In when you call this admin UI, you can find out that when I mouse over on the Siteminder admin UI, it will show me a path. This is the path, means a launcher.html. This is just a HTML file which represent means the whole Siteminder to the user to as a graphical interface. So this is my presentation layer, so it will present my Siteminder content. Similarly, when I logged into the system, all the tasks of Siteminder will shown to me, and the logged in server name, logged in username, all other things stuffs are showing to me. This will be invoked from this index.jsp page. So if I consider my architecture in this concept of Siteminder, my web browser will act as a client layer from where I am accessing my Siteminder content. Second thing is the presentation layer where my Siteminder server will send me the data. So, because when we will go for installation process of Siteminder, at that time I can show you the Siteminder is installed on a application server that is called a JBoss application server. In application server, the applications, the Siteminder content comes under a JSP file, a servlet file, or HTML file. So when you access from your browser to these files, it will represent all the data as a graphical format that will come under your presentation logic layer. So in the third layer, what it does, as a part of third layer, this is the class, this is the servlet container, this is the exactly the business logic container where it will contain all the business logic, it will contain the connection parameter, it will contain all other details which is required to process those contents, process the request to fetch the data from the backend. So backend exactly the last layer of an architecture where it containing the data of the system, contain the data of the product. Here what happens, I have a directory server, I have a database, I have a legacy application. So all these systems contains my data. So when a user click my application or click my Siteminder, what it does, it will come as a HTTP request or HTTPS request to my presentation layer. Once my presentation layer will send me any static page if required, or if it send me a JSP page or HTML or servlet page, what it does, it just send me a static page without any uh, further required or without any further application of business logic. So when I further process on my Siteminder, it will contain the JSP files, the servlet files, all files will uh, calculate its business logic at the logic layer, and based on the logic it will, if it required, it will connect to the different server from directory server as a LDAP connection, for database as a JDBC connection, any other legacy application as a JMS connection, to make a connection to the backend. So once the data fetched from the backend, the EJB container will calculate the business logic, and based on the business logic it will send the data to my presentation layer, and the presentation layer will represent the data to my client. So exactly the SiteMinder product will show its architecture in this way. So this is exactly the concept of SiteMinder and the architectural representation of SiteMinder. This is only the product architecture, not the implementation of SiteMinder architecture. So in our later session we will see how we can represent, how we can implement our SiteMinder as a different architectural level, like single mode deployment, multi-mode deployment. All those steps we will cover on our later sessions. So we'll go to the next slide. Here what it explains the entire architecture, entire architectural model, which exactly contains the client browser. This is maybe a thick client or thin client or a standalone application. Similarly, if I say my legacy systems or database or directory server, all those comes under my backend system. So my backend system will contain the data, and it will provide me all the required data part of a particular application, which is going to be protected by SiteMinder, or my user store data it will contain. So next part it contains a web server. So web server exactly it process my initial request, where my web agent is uh, sit over here, and web agent will present and interrupt all the requests which is coming to my web server, means application server. So once the request will come to my web server, the web agent will come into picture. It just interrupt all the requests. Once the request is interrupted by a web agent, it interrupt by a web agent, it will directly connect my policy server, application server, to find out what policy is implemented on this request, what policy is implemented on the accessible URL. So based on that policy, it will calculate all the stuffs and represent me my login page, or represent me my page where I can access, so the page where I can work for. If you want, I can show one exact scenario over here on a dummy application page I have protected with SiteMinder. Let's see that example first. Yeah, this is my SiteMinder environment installed in my system. I have installed in SiteMinder admin UI. From admin UI I am accessing, this is my graphical representation of SiteMinder, and the SiteMinder will serving me based on my request. So right now I'm logging to my system. Once I logged into my system, it will show me all the tasks I can do with SiteMinder, different policies, and all other reporting system, administration system. So we will see all those tasks one by one, but now I am just showing how this entire application and the web agent and web server come into picture. So for this session, what we have done, I have installed all those things with an Apache server. So I'm just clicking on the Apache server. So as a testing page of Apache, right now my Apache is running and my web agent is installed over Apache. So I have a dummy application, that is, if I go to my applications, here what we have done, I have created a means application protection and the rule and the policy for this one. So see over here, I have defined two things. One is my portal page contain two applications. One is a test application, one is a my app. So my test application is running in Apache, server. This is a static page for dummy application. So this application is protected by Siteminder with basic authentication process. So what happens when I go to my application, and if I go to my application, if I hit a click on it, what it does, the request will send to my web server, and web server will interrupt it. The request is interrupted by my web agent. So once the web agent interrupt the request, it will send you the authentication process. Means we have shown over here, we have given a basic authentication for this one. So it just send me the basic authentication screen. So here I have to provide my credentials. So once I provide my credential, I click hit. So what it does, the credential will be shared to the Siteminder. Siteminder will authenticate the user against my LDAP store, my user store. Once the user store is authenticated, it will redirect me to my application. So exactly, this is a dummy page. I have not done a bigger change on it. We will show over later sessions how that also can be managed through Siteminder. How login will be enabled, login page will be disabled, all those steps we'll see later stage. So this is a dummy page what I have protected with right now. So here what it does, it exactly calculate any authentication of the user. Once the user is authenticated, it just send me to my application based on user authorization. Suppose what I will do, I'll just close the session, and if I open the same thing again, it will ask me for this session, means authentication. Suppose I am cancelling this one, means my application is running but I am not authenticated. I am not a valid user for my Siteminder. The agent is present over the web server. It not allow me to access the application. It directly says me this is the access denied for not one error. So till the time I am not a authorized user, the particular means authentic valid user, I am not authorized to access any of the application which is protected with Siteminder. So this is exactly my Siteminder flow will come into picture. The architecture of the product will come into picture. So let's go to our next slide. We'll see what all core components Siteminder has and how all those core component is connected to each other. So if I have Siteminder with me, then Siteminder core component will contain all those stuffs. All those stuffs in the sense, first thing is my protected resource, for which I am implementing my Siteminder and protecting my resources. Then it comes to my web server. Web server in the sense where exactly the request will come first and land over here, from where my web agent will come into picture and will interrupt all the requests over there and pass the request to the application server, my policy server, to check for authentication and authorization process. So once the Siteminder web server will come into picture, then my next part is my policy server. The policy server is one of the important component for Siteminder perspective. What it does, all the requests coming from web server to my policy server will check the request associated with the policy, and it store all the detail of this policy to a data store, means Siteminder store. It may be a database, it may be a LDAP, so, or it may be a text file. It doesn't matter how you want to store your data, your policy, your user, your key, or your certification sessions, all those stuffs. So basically what it does, policy server will store all those detail in the stores, data stores, and process the request. To administrate this policy server from a graphical user interface, we need to install an administrative UI. This administrative UI also connected to a audit store, audit database. Audit database will, what it does, it will contain all end-to-end transaction of policy server in its store, so that when I install a report server and I connect that report server to my Siteminder, then report server will fetch all the report detail from my audit database. Similarly, report server will have its own DB for centralizing all the reports and storing all the reports like snapshot, templates, all those details. So these all are core component of Siteminder overview, in Siteminder thing. And certainly the Siteminder policy server will link to its policy store, which contain all the different policies the Siteminder is going to maintain all its system. Similarly, the user, whatever the user present in the LDAP, the associated LDAP, that is maintained by Siteminder in its user store. Means those directory LDAPs and act as a user store for Siteminder. Similarly, maximum time what happens, we need to authenticate Siteminder or applications, means the application with a Siteminder based on certificate, means 509 authentication instead of plain text user authentication or username password based authentication. In that time what happens, it will store its private key, public key, or the certificate key, or the encryption method, the encryption key over its key store. So basically, if you want, basically the key store contain all the key regarding the policy server requirement. Suppose I am using my Siteminder admin password, so the key store will contain my private key and the public key, which will encrypt my password and user data and sensitive data. So key store can be integrated this key store can be integrated with the policy store, or I can make it a segregation of that. How we can do, I will show you in on my how we can see. So I can show you in when I install the Siteminder. Similarly, the session store. Suppose I am want that my client want that the Siteminder should maintain all the sessions of its user sessions in server level instead of maintaining my session at browser level. They want that the session need to be captured, so that we can manage the session and find out who are using the session at what point of time, and who all are authenticated in during a particular session. So for managing those type of requirement, we can have a session store with Siteminder. So these all are core component of Siteminder. When we need to we need to understand first, and then when we go for installation, we will install all this stuff. The last and important part is that Federation Security Service. This is also a part of Siteminder, where it happens that suppose I am providing an SSO between two applications, but unfortunately there is no relation. Both applications are protected by different IDM or the access manager component. So in that case what happens, I can't pass my cookie from one IDM component to other IDM component as a SSO format without having any partnership between the applications. So in that case what happens, I need to put a federation between these two applications of two different domain or two different cookie domains, so that my cookie will securely transfer from one domain to other domain. So this is the thing that so if I say this is the domain domain 1, and this is between two domain I can put my federation. So let's see each component wise. We will see how these components are, or what these components are. Okay, so uh, this is exactly the flow I explained over the demo. So that flow will come into picture in a core level means what all component will come into picture when Siteminder is installed, and how this Siteminder are pointed out, and what pointed the component is called. So this thing is explained in this slide. What it does in this slide, I am a end user. I'm just hitted my URL over my browser, like we access my URL of Apache test. So I just hit my URL. What it does, so uh, it just send my request to my web agent. So web agent, web server, to my web server contain my web agent. So this web agent check my request, and based on the request is send my means based on the request it just interrupted and check in the policy server that whether the request is uh, protected or not. If the resource is protected, then it just send me the login page. Like in this case, if I say in this case we got this basic authentication, user authentication page. So in this case what it does, it just enforce my policy. It just calculate my policy server that whether the thing is enforced or not. So it find out that the request has been protected by Siteminder. So it just send me the login page. So this web server with web agent is called as my policy enforcement point. Similarly, when the agent send the request to the policy server calculate the policy, what policy it is mentioned, what policy has been created for this one. If I show you over here what it does, if I go to my Siteminder, and if I go to my application, this is my application which is protected. And if I go to my policy, a policy is defined for my test application. See, uh, it, in portal resource one is defined for my test application. What it does, the test application, whatever the content will contain inside my test application, it is protected. Similarly, what it does, an action part, it is just a web agent. It will fetch, get, post and put data from my page. So this is the policy defined for my application. This is it's been calculated by my policy server. So uh, for this calculation, for this decision, what happens at policy server level for not protecting means for accessing the application, uh, due due to this decision of policy server, this point is called as policy decision point. Similarly, policy administration point, the console of administration, the admin UI GUI, where I am managing my policy, my user store, my authentication store, and my LDAP, all other thing, that is managed from my central management portal. If I say that is not wrong, if you see this whole admin console where you are managing my infrastructure web agents, where I am managing my directories, means user directories, all stuffs. So this is the normal administration page where I am administrating all the files for Siteminder installation. So this is called as my policy administration point. Similarly, for administrating this policy server, I need to be a administrator of my organization, and I can administrate my application from my admin UI. So if I come to my policy server, the policy server will have policy store where it contain all the policy details. It store all the policy detail. Similarly, it store the it contain a key store where it store the private and public key, which will encrypt the user data, which will encrypt user password and send it to user. Similarly, user store, so user store may be an LDAP store, maybe a database. If I so in this case, I have a user store. This is my test LDAP. This is LDAP based user store. If I have integrated this one with Siteminder, if I go to my LDAP store and view my content, I can see all the container, all the user over here. Suppose I am searching for user over here and search over here. I can search all the user present in my LDAP. So this is the user store for my uh, Siteminder. So Siteminder will contain all those stuff with this one, that all connected to my policy server. Okay, so this is exactly the core component for Siteminder. So similar thing I have explained over here. What does a policy enforcement point will do? And its policy enforcement point is exactly also known as a web agent, which will intercept all the requests to communicate with the PDP to determine whether a user should have access or not. So what exactly is done by this agent is, agent will interrupt each and every point of my request, and once the request has been interrupted, it will provide for further decision to the policy decision point. So it will authenticate the user. It will start, means initiate the authentication. It is not authenticating, it is just start the authentication, and all the data whatever required for our Siteminder policy server to calculate the policy, it just send all those data to the policy server. So this is called as the policy enforcement point. So next is the policy decision point, is also known as the policy server, which will authenticate the user, evaluate security policies, send authorization decisions to the policy enforcement point, and it exactly whatever the transaction going on from end to end. So whatever the transaction is happening from end to end, means starting from authentication, authorization, administration of event, and all other thing, it is just comes under policy decision point, means with the policy server, means for integrating the user store, integrating the active directory, integrating the relational database store. All these things are comes under policy decision point, which will exactly incorporate with itself and calculate all the policy. This policy server can be installed in multiple platform, means suppose I have a Windows platform, I have a Linux platform. It doesn't matter how what type of platform we are using and what type of operating system we are using, but policy server can be installed in any of this platform. Similarly, its architecture, if I explain this, how this the total SiteMinder architecture and entire architecture happens, means what exactly it does. So it can exactly go for a product level. But when I come to the implementation of SiteMinder, implementation of this architecture, I can implement this to a normal single point of deployment, or I can implement a large multiple component point of deployment. So if I need to increase my architecture, if I need to scalable my application to incorporate my more of data traffic, incorporate my huge data load or request load, at that time also I can scalable my architecture without any problem to my existing architecture. So this is part of policy decision point. If I go to administration, it's just a administrative UI which will manage all the SiteMinder administration, means policy server, user directory integration, directory integrations, user store integration. All those steps are done by administration point. Now come to the process, means how this request will flow from my web server to access my protected resource. So what happens when I am an end user? I just hit my request, is go to the web server. Web server contains an web agent which is interrupted by which interrupt all the requests, which intercept all the requests, and check whether the resource is protected not against the policy server. If I show you over here, I have installed my SiteMinder, and I have installed my web agent. This is my web agent folder I'm showing over here. Suppose, so what I will do, if I go to my Apache installation directory, this is my Apache installation directory. Once I have installed my web agent, what will come in configuration folder, I will see my web agent. See what is does the web agent. Web agent will contain the web agent name, whether it is enabled or not, what is the configuration file it contains. So all those stuffs it is recorded over my web agent file, and it contains the it will change the httpd conf file. It will load all the required .so file, and it will integrate the SiteMinder agent configuration with my Apache. Let me show you what all things it integrated. See, when I install all the my web agent, it integrate means it added all these stuffs to my Apache httpd conf file. Here it does problem, means what is the web agent path, how the web agent will be configured with the web server, which need to be allow, which need to be deny, and which from which sources need to be do all interruption. All those things it will come over here, and it will integrate, and it will provide the permissions to the agent to work with the web server. So this is my web agent with web server. So once this interruption will calculated with the policy server send the user data to web agent. So web agent again, policy server will check for the authentication first, then it send the request data to web agent. So first it does authentication check. If user is authenticated, it will directly pass the user data, if required user data, to resource. If it is not, it will go and check against the users to user is authenticated or not, or valid user or not. Once the user is authenticated, it will send create the session cookie and session parameter. Then it go and check for the user authorization. Is the user is authorized or not? Once the user is authorized to access a particular resource, then it just allow user to access my resource. So this is the flow of user from my web browser, from my user web browser to my protected resource. So let's go to the next slide. In this slide we are just explaining what all different type of agent present for Siteminder, which will be integrated with Siteminder. So what happens when I consider a Siteminder agent can be a normal web agent. Just go or sit over the web server and calculate or intercept all the requests, or it is a ERP agent or identity federation. So all this stuff by type of agent present for Siteminder. So here we will discuss what all different type of agent we can integrate with Siteminder. In this, it is a secure proxy server. Proxy server means we can use any of the proxy server for Siteminder integration, where it just have a agent integration with the web server, and it will proxy my web server request. Means suppose I have a um, um, complex J2E, complex servlet or complex Hibernate application, which will calculate all the servlet and contain it will only hosted in my application server, and I don't want to show in the outside world that my what exactly the user means my web server detail, what exactly my the application server URL. So what I does, I have added a proxy server in front of my web server, and I have proxied all my requests from web proxy server to my destination web server. So but in that case what I will do, I will directly put my agent on my secure proxy server instead of putting my agent on the destination web server. So in that case what happens, when the request will come to my access my resource, instead of user request directly going to my destination web server, it will go to my secure proxy server. Secure proxy server will have the agent that will contact the policy server for authentication, authorization and all. Once this is done by secure proxy server, it will just redirect user to the destination web server, and the destination web server will serve the request and pass the user detail or user to the application server to carry on its task or to service the application to the user. So this exact scenario will be created, means this process will be done by secure proxy server. If I don't want to provide my server details, my server exactly internal server detail to my outside world, so just I have done a web server, means a proxy server in front of my web server, and just my proxy all my request to my destination server. So this is exactly how a secure proxy server is integrated with Siteminder. In second step, what happens, this is a ASA or ERP agent. In that case what happens, whatever the request comes from to my directly to my web server or to my proxy server, thus is contacted my policy server will authenticate the user. But again I don't want directly authenticated user to access my application server. So in that case what I will do, I will put a ERP agent over application. That ERP agent will talk to my web server agent. So what happens, so this agent will have contacted the policy server will contact the agent. So this agent will pass the detail to policy server for authentication. This policy server again will contact this application server agent to find out the user is present in the application side or not, the user is authorized in application side or not. So all those steps were done by the application, and the reason is that the ERP application needs that the ERP applications need that the user should be authorized by their application side, then only they will provide the access to the application. So in that case those thing also be possible to integrate with Siteminder. So we can directly put a VRP agent over application server and can have a communication between the application server agent with my web server agent. In identity federation, the third part is called as my identity federation. What it does in identity federation, if I have multiple domains, multiple applications, means I have one application in cloud, I have one application in on-premises. So in that case, what happens, I can't provide direct SSO to my on-premise application or to my cloud application. Suppose I have logged into my on-premise and I can't directly access my cloud application or different domain application within the same domain cookie. So what happens for this process, we have an option called as identity federation. In this identity federation, what it does, it Siteminder will create two entities. One is an identity provider, one is a service provider. In service provider side or identity provider side, what happens when the user will can request from any of the direction. Suppose I am a user and I am accessing the service provider URL. In that case, the service provider URL will contact to the identity provider's web server and authenticate itself against the identity provider policy server. That policy server will send me a sample token. Any token based authentication will happen for this federation, as the partnership is already established between the service provider and identity provider. So it will just send me a token and I can recognize the token based on my partnership value, partnership ID, and all this partnership detail I have mentioned over Siteminder. So I will show you all those tasks when we go and set up a federation between all those steps. Just showing over here how this partnership will come here. We can define the entity. One is called as right now this is for a different entity version. If I want to have a partnership with Google, Facebook, LinkedIn, Microsoft account or Twitter. So if I go to my partnership, here I need to define a partnership. If I go and create a partnership, here you can see this is my token SAML2 token, SAML 1.1 token, WS Fed token, OAuth client for auth server type, and here it will provide me two entity. One is an IDP entity, one is an SP entity. Suppose I am creating a partnership IDP to SP. So if I click on IDP to SP, then I am act as a IDP for the application, and so my authentication store come into picture. So I can choose my authentication. I can select my IDP. So as I am choosing IDP to SP, so my Siteminder will act as a local IDP and the service provider will act as a remote service provider. So that thing I will show you how we can configure. So that will call as a identity federation for Siteminder. Then we will see how we can deploy our whole Siteminder into different data center. We can make a failover connection, we can make a load balancing connection. So this is called as a large scale deployment. Suppose I have more number of agents, what I can do, I can create a agent group for this one. Let me show you. Just canceling this one. If I go to infrastructure, if I go to agent, if I show you agent group, here I can, what I can do, create a agent group, or in this agent group I can pass more number of web agent at a time. I can give a name to this one and I can add group members. Whatever this is only one agent I have created. Select member and select agent group, which group I want to add. All those things I can define as a agent group. So this is called as agent group. So here you can see a more number of agent is grouped over one thing and one more number of group of agent over here. So I can deploy the whole architecture of Siteminder in two different parts. One is the data center 1, another is data center 2. So for maintaining a user request from data center 1 to data center 2, I'm using a load balancer between all those between two data center. Again, I can use a load balancer to balancing all the load between my agents, and I can make them a group to serve the request. So basically, this type of requirement come into picture when we want to implement SiteMinder in a larger and broader perspective of organization. So in between accessing my data center 1 and data center 2, I have web server where I have implemented that agent grouping load balancing between two agents. But how this agent 1 of data center will contact to agent policy server of data center 2? For that I need to make a failover mapping. Means SiteMinder product itself is policy server itself is so intelligent that it can manage itself the flipping of load balancing, flipping of failover. Means the agent present over here configured with this policy servers 2 and policy agent configured over data center 2 and policy server 1, all are checking between all this between these two policy server. Means all agent present over 1 and 2 will hit a ping request to agent cluster 1, ping request to cluster 2, means server cluster 2, and find out which policy server is up and running. If policy server 1 is up, then whole request will come to policy server 1, and if policy server 2 is up, it will go to policy server 2. If both are up and running, then it will just create a load balancing between the policy server cluster. So this is the large scale deployment for SiteMinder. So in later sessions I can show you one deployment steps, how you can plan your deployment in your organization for multiple component. Okay, so let's go to the next slide. Here I am saying the cookie. What happens, what does this single sign-on mean? I think you all have an idea how this single sign-on will go, means work right now, as I explained in my introductory session 1 and in the section 2 itself. So what it does in the session domain, means once a user is authenticated against my policy server, it will create a session for me. Once the session is created, it will create a session cookie. That cookie will contain all the information regarding my the user authentication, user domain, my cookie domain, and my user detail and authentication, set timeout, session timeout, cookie expiry timeout. So all those steps will be contained in that secure cookie. If I secure cookie, but this secure cookie will come across means single uh, cookie domain or multiple cookie domain. If I want that my cookie should work in a particular domain, then I can define that one also in SiteMinder. So only the same domain applications will be in a group of SSO, means single sign-on between these application will happen when they come into the domain, means in the same domain. If I say multiple cookie domain, in that case what happens, the cookie created by one policy server will pass to the second need to have a partnership or authorization to access the cookie. So based on that, it will just create a multiple cookie session and provide a extended SSO. This is basically called as a federation process for SiteMinder. So this exactly based on this, the SSO will work. So for today's session, we have seen how this SiteMinder is architecture is, how this is working, how the held up user store, policy store, and all are integrated with SiteMinder, and how this large scale deployment happens, and the user application protection. And we have gone through the demo itself, means how this is happening, how the authentication maintains, and the web agent installation, how the web agent will intercept all the requests. So in our later session we will see how the installation process will happen, what all installation component we will do for, and how we can install all those steps in our environment. We will going to study in our later session. So till then, bye bye, and thanks for attending the session. Thank you all.